Oh, he's not going to heaven. I know for sure that this man is not going to heaven.
We either had a mass suicide or a mass murder.
I went into a different room, especially when I went in the cellar. I didn't know what I was going to find.
Methodically kill your mother, your wife, and your 3 kids is beyond comprehension.
The oldest we've ever pursued on America's Most Wanted. The suspect is accused of murdering his family 17 years ago.
Nobody had a clue where he disappeared to or even remotely what he looked like.
John Emma List is a mass murderer who on November 9, 1971, murdered his mother, 3 children, and his wife in their sparsely furnished 18-room mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, and disappeared. While his kids were at school, John shot his wife Helen in the back of the head and minutes later shot his mother above her left eye. Later that afternoon, his son Frederick and his daughter Patricia arrived home from school. When they got home, he shot them in the back of the head and left the bodies where they dropped. He then drove to his eldest son John Jr.'s soccer game. After driving home from the game, he proceeded to shoot John Jr. repeatedly in his chest and face. He then dropped everyone but his mother in sleeping bags and laid them in the mansion's ballroom. He carefully cleaned up his mess and removed his face from every family photo in the house. He turned the radio to a religious radio station and left.
Deeply religious man, introverted, soft-spoken, a gentleman. The kind of person you would not mind having as a next-door neighbor. And the whole family was like that.
He had already done and planned everything out so meticulously that nearly a month had passed before anyone noticed that anything was amiss. It wasn't until December 7th, nearly 1 month after the murders occurred, that the bodies were found.
For those next few weeks, the imposing List mansion sat quietly, lit up by the interior house lights.
And this stayed on for days passed, weeks passed. Slowly, finally, eventually the lights start going out one by one.
This aroused the suspicions of neighbors who called Westfield police. On December 7th, officers Charles Heller and George Zelznick were dispatched to the List house. By this time, the family hadn't been seen for nearly a month.
My partner and I parked out on the street, walked up, went around, checked the house. Everything appeared to be in order.
Neighbors informed the officers that the family was on a trip. They didn't know whether List's elderly mother had gone with them. Concerned for her well-being, the 2 policemen decided to enter through an unlocked window.
We started looking around the house, and there was a light coming from the 2nd floor, which sort of lit very eerily the 1st floor. Just enough light that you could get around, but not with very good vision.
They passed through the butler's pantry into the kitchen. There they noticed what appeared to be bloodstains on the floor.
And the unnerving part of the whole situation was that there was music playing in the house, and it was a very classical, serene, almost like you would hear if you went to a funeral parlor.
The officers then made their way towards the ballroom, on the opposite side of the house.
There were great big drapes over this archway, and of course when we opened the drapes and put our flashlights in the room where there was no light, we discovered a rather grisly sight.
By 1985, nearly 15 years had passed since John List murdered his family and became a fugitive. His life had long since returned to normal. He went back to his old career as an accountant and even met a woman at a church function whom he went on to marry. Police, though, were no closer to finding him than they had been in 1971. Still, many officers remain committed. Some even say obsessed with finding John List and bringing him to justice. The result? A remarkable alliance between law enforcement and the media that would finally crack the case.
As you might already know, John was a fugitive for a while. It took authorities 18 years to finally apprehend John. Prior to the killings on November 9th, 1971, John had thoroughly thought out his plan. Informing his children's school and part-time jobs that the kids would be out of town for several weeks, visiting their grandmother in North Carolina. He also stopped all newspaper and milk deliveries to the house. Having done this, authorities did not become aware of the murders till almost 1 month after they happened. Having almost 1 month before authorities could pursue John helped him avoid capture enormously. Following the murders on November 9th, John had driven himself to Kennedy Airport but never boarded a plane. Instead, he boarded a bus and headed west to Michigan, then soon after to Colorado. After settling in Colorado, John was now referred to as Robert Clark. Eventually, John found himself an accounting job in Denver. After some time in Colorado, John found himself a woman, Dolores Miller, and married her, doing all this under the new alias Robert Clark. Now, 1985, 14 years after he killed his family in New Jersey, John is remarried and relocated to Virginia. In Virginia, John lived a similar life to the one in Colorado. Using his alias Robert Clark, he had gotten another accounting position. Meanwhile, back in New Jersey, authorities have pursued hundreds of leads, all turning up unsuccessful.
The people in Westfield thought about him every year on the anniversary. Every paper in the state of New Jersey covered the story. It's 2 years, it's 5 years, it's 10 years since the List murders. Where is he now?
The FBI had long since joined the search for John List, and he became one of their most wanted fugitives. As for the local police in Westfield, even 15 years after the crime, capturing List remained a high priority.
For him to be gone for that many years and not be brought to justice was like a personal affront to the office and to the Westfield Police Department.
Now tonight's first case, the oldest we've ever pursued on America's Most Wanted. The suspect, John List, is accused of murdering his family 17 years ago.
As a result, they turned to the television show America's Most Wanted for some help. A brilliant forensic scientist, Frank Bender, was hired to study John and ultimately create a clay sculpture to what he thought John would look like then. Frank created the sculpture and it was aired on national television. Only 11 days following the show, on June 1st, 1989, one of John's old neighbors from Colorado informed police that John List may be Robert Clark.
I saw the tail end of it. I saw that it was about me and then saw the bust that they had. I was surprised at how accurate it was. I didn't realize that they had that technology.
After the show aired, more than 200 tips were phoned in, claiming knowledge of John List's whereabouts. One call stood out. It was from Denver, Colorado.
It was a next-door neighbor, and when they did the report on the List murders, she was convinced that that was Bob Clark, the neighbor who lived next door, who had just moved with his wife to Virginia.
The FBI was immediately contacted regarding the tip. 11 days later, on June 1st, 1989, federal agents arrived at the Richmond home of Bob Clark while he was at work.
When the FBI went to the house, his wife, Dolores, his new wife, didn't believe that it really was John List.
Like most people would be, you'd be totally shocked. This comes out of a clear blue sky. She apparently had no suspicions or inclinations whatsoever that this could even be possible.
Hoping to prove the agents wrong, Dolores told them they could find her husband, Bob Clark, at his accounting office.
2 agents went to where he was working. When they talked to him, he, of course, denied being John List. Then they brought him back to headquarters where they fingerprinted him, and they compared his fingerprints to that of John List, and it came back as a match. No questions asked. It was John List.
Investigating Robert Clark, authorities had gotten the man they wanted for 18 years. John was arrested at an accounting firm in Virginia.
On June 29, 1989, 63-year-old John List was extradited from Virginia to New Jersey to face first-degree murder charges in court. Here in court, formerly known as Robert Clark, finally admitted he was in fact the missing John List. Police from Westfield preserved nearly every piece of evidence from the 17-year-old crime, which made the trial much easier on the prosecutor. List's plan in court was to admit the murders, but blame the crime on his personality disorder. A few weeks later, List was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms in prison. On March 21, 2008, while in prison custody at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey, List died from complications of pneumonia at the age of 82. In reportings of his death, he was referred to as the Boogeyman of Westfield in the New York Star-Ledger. He was later buried next to his mother at St. Lorenz Lutheran Cemetery in Michigan.